So we call this idea the atomic economy, and it's meant to represent the ability to have a free market society that is, parallel to what we currently do. Um, as far as what's relevant to Pubkey, it kind of spans all of these layers. You'll see here there's something marked as data layer, application layer, payment settlement layers, and identity layer. Maybe the easiest thing to do is start at the middle, where you see it says wallet keychain in the black box. That just represents needing some kind of keychain to put keys in so you can either sign or authenticate into things. Then if you go down from there, you'll see yourself represented as an ed key, and then go to the right, you can see you can use that key to sign a DNS record, which we're calling Pubky, public key addressable resource records, and putting that in mainline DHT. Mainline DHT, for those that are unfamiliar, is as far as we know, the largest, most decentralized, oldest network on the web or on the internet. And it's what powers and coordinates what happens, mainly known for what powers and coordinates what happens with torrents and BitTorrent. It is not BitTorrent itself necessarily, but a major aspect of what makes it work. We use this network as a means to achieve a discovery method, which most other web things, like, for example, Nostr, lack any sort of credible exit, for their system. So this is getting into now PKDNS, which is it's not only a server that speaks Pubky, but also it's just a generalized topic or term we're using for this suite of software where you have the mainline repo, PKDNS, you have Pubky, and a few other things related to that. So that these are all the black squares representing the identity layer and a lot of mainly the Pubky related stuff. From there, you can see the blue stuff is the data layer, and this represents kind of more of the Pubkey core aspects for home servers and indexers. Home servers are just servers where you can have your data, but you point to them as a source of truth using your PKDNS record. So unlike, say, Nostr, where you have a pool of relays where you're spraying and praying, you can actually tell people that look up your key specifically where to look, or even where to look for specific things. And you can set up normal web, methods for doing fallbacks and mirrors and things like this. Granted, we still have to build some of these things for it to all be true. But the home servers are meant to either be run on your own or as an app. You can provide hosted home servers services if you want to, because again, you have the credible exit. So even if somebody misbehaves, the user can always just change their provider. The indexers are basically, they're sort of filling the role of Google, in aggregating data. They're also filling the role of social graphs and establishing an open graph in the Pubkey ecosystem. And generally, they're just a way to make apps actually possible in a peer-to-peer web, because they provide basically an aggregated view of everybody in the Pubkeyverse. And they do this in our system right now in a distinct way through what we call a semantic social graph. The semantic social graph is just a way of using these indexers as a graph and having the primary aspects of it be keys, like identities, people, pub keys, and URLs. And then you connect either the keys to other keys or keys to other URLs with a semantic tag. And this can be an arbitrary flat thing. And the graph uses these relationships both to establish distance like a social graph, but also context. So you can do basically any type of paradigm you would want to for reputation, web of trust, etc., in a very user-oriented way, because all of the source data comes from each individual user's own tagging, and they choose which tags of others to include as relevant. And this starts leading us into the application layer, the green boxes. Here is where you start applying all this stuff, how you can leverage your identity and leverage your home server data and now the tags that you are creating with the people in your social graph. And you can express this through, I've listed a few different use cases, the primary ones you would need here, which are social media, search and discovery, and marketplaces. sometimes people will look at what we're doing and they'll think, oh, we're just building a social media app. But the issue is that when you do things on the web and a peer to peer web, kind of everything becomes social media in a way because everything requires interaction and confirmation and reputation because there's a lot less, at least, authorities in the system and centralized, providers of trust. So you end up needing to have this social graph substrate and ability to say tag or reply or provide feedback on any aspect, basically any other key or any other URL. And that's what the social media does. But you need those kind of features to be able to do interesting things with marketplaces and many other use cases, like if you want to do peer-to-peer music curation, etc. Search and discovery, I mean this now, I'm flipping from the identity sense to the discovering of content in URLs sense. And this is again another way that you can apply the indexers because you can index any URL. You could re-index the entire web this way, which is something I like to see happen someday where whether they be URLs in Noster or in www for ICANN domains, they're all there able to be indexed and discovered from within relevant indexers. On the bottom there, I've kind of squeezed in this subjective algorithms concept. Again, this is more related to the graph and less concrete of an idea, but more getting into there's a lot more we can do with the system later to establish governance aspects. Right now, we mostly cover, fighting big tech and fighting big banks with Bitcoin and Lightning and stuff. But there's also the big states problem. And I do think that the indexing that we do with a semantic social graph can cover a lot of that as well. Once you start tagging on things like punishment methods, any sort of, dynamic governance systems, etc. But this is more futuristic sort of stuff that I just wanted to tag in there. And then finally, the red boxes. This represents all of the payment and settlement layer stuff. The reason why it's interesting to bring this up is because we are going to be doing distinct things through Pubky with this. First, what you'll probably see is the research and development around PayKit. And PayKit is a way that we're abstracting and coordinating any type of payment method across applications to do peer-to-peer settlement, and then basically be able to provide a proof of that to applications to basically unlock or give credentials to specific keys. The idea there is to basically have a core primitive for monetization and e-commerce features within the system. Once you have some ability to provide some sort of monetize access control or paywalling or subscribing or credential to access data, you unlock all of the rest. And so we'll start with something like that. That's our the PayKit private data aspects are already in R&D, but it's still going to be some time before we get that integrated into something like BitKit, so we can demonstrate the ability to unlock data in a peer-to-peer way. In that section, you'll see there's the payments layer separated from the settlement layer. A lot of times people just talk about Bitcoin and Lightning or Bitcoin versus fiat, but what we kind of believe is that the only way to scale payments is to use trust. And so we have another project that we'll be detailing more in the future called Atomicity, which is just basically taking concepts of routing networks and just using actual signed credit and debt between peers instead of any sort of backing, and using this as a way to coordinate the payment layer, much like credit cards do, but in a peer-to-peer way. And then using that to ultimately coordinate settlements on Bitcoin, Lightning, or any other payment method that people want to agree on. I don't know if this is too much detail. It's not all about Pubky. It's more of an overview for Synonym and the Atomic Economy, but it does kind of give you an idea of how we see the system and why we have the roles that we have as we present the rest of the items today.